The murder of the young soldier Lee Rigby on a London street this week shocked the country. All the more so since it was carried out in broad daylight and with an attempted justification couched in religious language. Mainstream Muslim organisations have condemned the attack as both barbaric and un-Islamic. Trevor Barnes has been to Woowich to assess the impact the killing has had on community relations. His report begins outside Greenwich Islamic Centre.
The community does not support that. What happened there is not a representation of us. This is not what Islam is about.
What do you make of the events of the other day?
Sad. Very sad. Do I say, I'm shocked to the core. We don't condone this kind of things. This is against the teaching of Islam.
I think it's outrageous, disrespectful towards Islam and the soldiers that sacrifice themselves.
So where did he get that teaching from?
God knows.
The teaching doesn't come from anywhere. That's their mentality.
Universal condemnation there from some of the worshippers coming out of the Greenwich Islamic Centre. I'm joined now by Tariq Abbasi, who is the centre's director, and also by Malcolm Torrey, a local community faith leader and an Anglican priest. Tariq Abbasi, first of all, how much damage has this done to interreligious relations?
I think we stand together, although this is a difficult time. Sometimes Sheikh Google is unfortunately the biggest teacher nowadays. Pick and choose, they cut and paste various forms of Islam and they try to implement it. I don't think we have a control over that mess.
Malcolm, how much of a setback has it been?
I don't think it's a setback at all to relationships between the faith communities in Greenwich. For there to be any connection made between religion and events like the murder that took place in Woolwich is a terrible thing to happen. It was not true religion in any sense.
A few minutes away from the mosque are the barracks where the murder took place. The perimeter fence opposite me is woven with flowers, and despite the rain, people keep coming to pay their respects. I noticed, ladies, you're bringing flowers to the scene of the crime. Why are you here and what do you make of it all?
Because I'm British and I support our troops.
Absolute disgrace. Terrible. It's just pure evil. That's all you can say, that it's just evil.
I know people who are Muslim and they don't believe in this sort of thing. They don't.
This is the Somali Parents Network, just half a mile from the scene of Wednesday's horror. Hussein Abdullahi is the project coordinator here. He came over from Somalia as a refugee from the Civil War in 1988. He's also been showing me around the area, which is home to a large proportion of the 5,000-strong Somali community.
It's a very good neighbourhood, very quiet until this terrible, horrible event happened. We have a lot of issues with young people, including of employment, lack of employment, lack of education. They are leaving schools without qualifications. They are involved in crimes and drugs, and they are really disengaged with their communities.
And do you think Islam, or a certain radical Islam, gives them a purpose, or what?
Back in Somalia, we were living in a harmonious way. We're respecting other cultures and tolerant other religions. But the young people who are facing these social pressures are quite vulnerable to fall into hands of extremism.
We've had a fair share of the extremist groups in the mosque. Al-Muhajirun, they were very active, and we got rid of them. Legally, we took injunctions and made sure that our kids are safe, our communities are safe, and the Muslims are safe.
Tariq Abbasi of the Greenwich Mosque. But extremists on one side have their counterparts on the other. A far-right rally in Woolwich soon after the murder saw clashes with police, and fears are being increasingly expressed that mosques and Muslims could be targeted in the backlash. Malcolm Torrey.
The EDL and similar extremist organisations can feed on vacuums, and if we ensure that the whole of our society responds to the values that we would wish them to know and sees that we work together as faith communities, there's less of a gap for those organisations to fill.
Something the Bishop of Woolwich, Michael Ipgrave, can completely endorse.
This is something that we are all in together, and we should not be singling out one particular community as responsible for this. There clearly is an issue around violent and extremist language, but The overwhelming impression I get from Woolwich is the Muslim community, the Christian community, people of no faith, the military and the civilian communities have all been deeply impacted by this. It's a problem that we share.
Michael Ipgrave, the Bishop of Woolwich, ending that report from Trevor Barnes. So what are the factors that lead to the radicalisation of those who are willing to kill? And how can that deadly process be reversed? Alexander Hitchens is Head of Research at the International Centre for the Study of Radicalisation at King's College London. Kadir Baksh is Chair of the Luton Islamic Centre. And Asghar Bukhari is from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Good morning to you all. You're very welcome. Alexander, can I begin generally? It's a big subject, very deep and complex, but let's begin with the broad outline of what radicalisation looks like, and how do you spot it?
Yes, hi, thanks. Well, I suppose radicalisation essentially refers to the process by which someone adopts what we would consider to be radical ideas. In this case, it would be the beginning of an adoption of the idea that Islam is not a spiritual religion but is a political ideology, the idea that Islam and Muslims are under threat by the West ideologically and physically. There's a war on Islam, and the belief that violence is the best way to respond to this. That would be a sort of in a nutshell.
So politicisation and militarisation.
Yes, indeed.
Kadir, I know you've been working to combat this since even before 9/11. What, in your experience, leads some on that path?
Well, first and foremost, I would disagree with the gentleman who said, who in a nutshell defined radicalisation, on the point that he said there's no spiritualization in those that become radicalized, whereas you'll find them very, very spiritual. You'll find them in the mosque reciting Quran and learning Arabic and so on and so forth. That is something characteristic of them. Second thing is that, we have to make a very, very clear distinction between radicalization and violent radicalization, because radicalization, as understood by the wider society and government and policies at this stage, it's really when somebody becomes politically aware and wishes to make a political change. Now, that's for me is not a dangerous point, because there are a lot of non-Muslims and also moderate Muslims who like to see a political change in the world, in their country and locality. The problem comes is when that radicalization, or that political awareness, if you like to call it, which I prefer to call it, turns to violent radicalization. That's where the problem is, and that's what we really should be discussing.
So, Asghar, we've added a third dimension to this, the spiritualization. Some will see that as an abduction of the spiritual for political or military purposes, but nevertheless, 3 strands so far laid out. There's clearly a failure to reverse this process of radicalisation. Who do you think is responsible for that?
Both the government and the Muslim organisations. The government who refuse to accept that this is all about policy. It's politics, politics, politics. That radicalises Muslims who see millions of people suffering around the world and then thus grow angry about it. Now, on the flip side of it, you have Muslim organisations who are completely refuse to tackle the anger of young Muslims by teaching them a peaceful political way forward. And that's why I reject your so-called security experts' opinion that says that anyone that's Muslim who becomes political is kind of somehow following a dangerous road. No, politics is a human way of tackling change. The problem here is violent, a violent pathway instead of taking a peaceful political pathway.
Alexander?
I should elaborate on both the criticisms I've just received. Firstly, yes, indeed, of course, spirituality has an aspect to play. These guys become very pious, and they show it in the way they dress, the way they behave. But then that becomes politicized. But when I say political Islam, I'm not saying Muslims who want to be politically active. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying these are people for whom Islam is not a religion, it is a political system. It is something which lays out a constitution, and it is something which says that God is the sole arbiter, the sole sovereign, the sole lawmaker. That is not a politically aware Muslim. That is somebody who is applying a political religious ideology.
Or is it someone who has embraced a certain worldview, a spiritual or theological worldview, which has a political outcome for them?
Well, no, because again, I said they're not. It's not just a spiritual outlook. It's the statement that the Quran is the constitution of the state. I should also just say, Mr. Bukhari has been on the airwaves since this happened, pushing this foreign policy line, the idea that this is only happening because of foreign policy. Now, I don't disagree that people are being recruited on the basis that they believe that there's a war on Islam, and they look at what's happening in Afghanistan, they look at what's happening in Iraq, and that's a fairly easy way to convince someone. But I should say, if we look at a number of incidents that have happened in this country and in Europe, such as, for example, the killing of Theo van Gogh, such as the constant threats of murder on people who draw cartoons of Muhammad, such as the attempt to burn down the house of the man who published a book called The Jewel of Medina, which was a book deemed to have been insulting to Muhammad.
Okay, we need to let Asghar.
Let me just finish.
Well, we need to let Asghar.
Okay, can I just finish? These are people who are not reacting to foreign policy. They're reacting to the idea that you can't offend Islam and that you can kill people on the basis of that.
Asghar.
Yes, but you're conflating issues. So what? Don't pick random extremist actions. They are, and then try to tie them in with a terrorist attack that is clearly to do with foreign policy. That the attackers themselves say, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You will never live in peace until we live in peace. The head of the Bin Laden unit, MI5, MI6, all of these agencies, Chatham House, are all saying it's a foreign policy issue. And here, so-called security experts like yourself are trying to conflate issues and to make it as if it's something, it's anything, everything.
Well, we've probably made as much progress on that single point that we need to go to the wider issues as well. Let me bring Kadir back in. Kadir, do you think that Islamic leaders have done enough to tackle extremism?
Well, I mean, on this issue, I think it's a cocktail of problems here. It's not just one problem we have here. It's not just about the foreign policy. Foreign policy is definitely part of the problem. Yes. And I don't think any of us three will disagree with that. But we have to look wider than that. And I also agree with the point which I've forgotten the gentleman's name. I'm so sorry.
Alexander.
Alexander, I beg your pardon. Alexander, I agree with your point that the extremists, these violent radicalists, that they do take on board an extreme understanding of al-Islam, which causes them to want to kill and harm those people who have insulted the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So that is a problem.
There is a connection there. Isn't there? There is a connection, Kadir, between that. Kadir, there is a connection between that and radical preachers, isn't there?
Point. That's what it's all about. Overemphasizing one part of al-Islam. Some overemphasize the political, the part of Islam. The others, they overemphasize the extremist hatred or the wala wal bara, as they call it, the hate and alliance and disassociation of al-Islam. This is where we find the problems are.
Asghar.
Look, there are extremists within the Muslim community. I'm not disagreeing with that. What I'm trying to say is separate a political extremist from a bigot, and don't conflate the two, because you're going to lead the public down a road and the government down a road where they will not stop another killing, a terrorist killing. Now, what I'm saying here is that Muslim organisations too have their part to play. They have failed because they cannot accept this central point, and also because they're too cowardly or too apathetic to do anything about their own community. Their community is becoming extreme because of the anger at foreign policy. Teach them a democratic way forward, that there's a peaceful way. But pathetically, the mosques, the thousands of them, have completely washed their hands and refused to take any action at all.
Well,
when are they going to be pressured to
let's
do that?
take that a little bit further. We're in our last couple of minutes. I want to take it further to what can be done to reverse this process, Alexander. And there are lots of dimensions to this, from universities and further education colleges, the role of the government and the government strategy being criticised in the papers today by many people.
Yeah. The government strategy specifically being referred to as the prevent strategy, a fairly controversial one, based on the premise that you can stop terrorism perhaps by intervening in someone's path towards violence early on, identifying it and intervening. And that's something that has worked at some occasions. There's the Channel Project is considered by some success. It's a part of the prevent strategy where professionals do intervene early on. But again, we have to recognize the limits of the government's role in this. There is a civil society element to this where really we have to equip people with the requisite sort of ideas so that they can reject these ideas as they come to them as individuals. They can see that this is wrong. They can see that this goes against their society. And
Kadir, just pick up that point and talk about what can be done within Islamic leadership in terms of radical preachers, or, for example, Michael Burley writing in today's Sunday Telegraph about some Islamic or Muslim student groups operating in campuses with the context of free speech, but peddling, he thinks, radicalisation.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that we Muslims have a lot to do within our establishments. There's no doubt about that. And also the wider society, like the universities, colleges, youth houses and other places like that, they have got to focus on their communities there as well. And I think if we Muslims have failed anywhere, as Bukhari is mentioning, where we failed is to teach and educate our Muslim youth on how to channel their frustrations and anger. Now, Bukhari is suggesting through democracy, this is the way forward, and political change. For me, I find that a secondary matter and something which, if can be done, all well and good. But I don't believe that that's going to make an immediate cause.
A brief final word, Asghar.
The reason why is because the Muslims vote for many different parties, and they are quite...
Look, Martin Luther King brought change politically. The suffragettes brought change politically. Both felt that their communities were oppressed. Why can't we? Stop making excuses and let's start doing something.
Asghar Bukhari, Kadir Bakhsh and Alexander Hitchens, many thanks to you all. That's it from this week's Sunday. If you'd like to comment on today's programme, you can email us to sunday@bbc.co.uk. You can listen again or download the programme from the Radio 4 website. Edward Sturton will be back in the chair next week. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Sunday.